We are going to be in 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 11 and 12. It says this, "Dear friends, I urge you as foreigners and exiles to abstain from sinful desires which wage war against your soul. Live such good lives among the pagans that, though they accuse you of doing wrong, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day that he visits us."
Fantastic. This is leaning so hard. What in the world just happened? We'll rock with it. Hey. 1 Peter 2, live such good lives. Said another way, live such beautiful or lovely or questionable lives among the pagans, among the non-followers of Jesus, among the outsiders, among the way of culture, that though they accuse you of doing wrong, they may see your way of life, your beautiful life, the way you lived and the way you interact and what gives you meaning, your good deeds, and they will glorify God. It's beautiful. One of my greatest pet peeves in life, getting to learn something new about me today, is when someone hands you paperwork to complete, and it's one of those like copies of a copy, crooked and hard to read, probably handed down for years. I see a lot of smiles. You know exactly what I'm talking about, right? It's kind of crazy is how often people are asking for very private, confidential, sensitive information on a piece of paper that looks like it hasn't been remade since 1988. I remember being in the doctor's office with Eliza recently after she gave birth to Vivian, and she's filling out the postpartum depression survey, standard practice, but a vulnerable and sensitive, potentially treatment facilitating survey, important stuff. But the paper copy itself, the means to this potentially life-changing resource, was complete junk. Crooked, smudged, hard to read, with the final two questions halfway off the page, making them kind of unanswerable. Clearly a copy of a copy of a copy from some downloaded online resource years ago that people just keep copying. And that messed with me as her protective husband in that moment, because I'm sitting there here thinking, unless there's something I don't know, there's a chance that she's going to be honest with things I'm not clued into yet, and this piece of paper is going to lead to some very sensitive, helpful resources, and in that, they're asking us to trust them with a pretty sensitive thing. And yet, the piece of paper by which they're asking for care and trust is illegible. It's hardly usable. And those two things don't seem to go together, right? Okay. Another example from the last few days of this particular pet peeve is I was standing talking to Ashley outside of our daycare reception area. And when I stand there and talk to her, I almost always fidget with the clipboards. There are two of them. There's a visitor's log and there's a parent's log, and in case the systems go down. And I square them up, I restack, I take the papers, and I'm just a little OC about that. And I noticed something again afresh that I'd noticed for a long time, but here or there. The login's crooked. The table is running off the page, and it drives me crazy. And I find it's like, Ashley, this is driving me crazy. She's like, yes, thank you. Someone else who drives crazy too. And I looked at her and said, Ashley, you know that you have full permission to see something like that and just fix it. And a sparkle happened in her eyeballs. And she didn't say anything, but I came back the next day, and there was a reconstructed, reprinted, redone, beautiful straight-edge table with updated fonts and no smudges, clearly printed. Not only that, but there were two new clipboards that matched one another for the first time in a long time. Not only that, the cup that was for pens but empty was full of pens, and all of a sudden my dreams came true, and we had a legible, trustworthy, care-inducing sign-in sheet. You see, in our lives, everything from forms on a clipboard to the way, say, a church interacts with the world, as has been our focus last week, and in this conclusion to our series today, when things get a bit off, when they become a little out of focus, when the things that present to others don't communicate as they should or in alignment with their greater purpose and even the intention of our hearts or one's hearts, when you notice it, there's a couple ways you can respond. You can keep copying over and over again. Brush it off, blame shift, say it's not my fault, it's always been this way, and just keep on going about business while continuing to hand off to the future a slowly decaying, less trustable form of the original, pun intended, form of the original. Thank you. Or, 2, you steward the moment you've been entrusted with. You retype, you reprint, and you take ownership for the present and you make the necessary changes. You innovate, you get creative, you adapt. Why, for us, is that the leading question as we come to the end of this series? It's because we care about people. And with people, there's always something greater at stake. My wife's doctor is constantly not just proving she's a good doctor, but she's proving that she cares and that she's trustworthy. And while it might seem like a small thing to some, an illegible depression survey doesn't assure me of the full picture. The parents at our daycare are entrusting us with the care and the safety of their children, and we do a great job of that. But little things like the condition of visitor logs convey a message that's different than what's in our heart and the intention of our center. For us, like as Bridge Church together, it's no different. And so this axiom, this journey of fear or love and the way we're presenting to the world and interacting with our neighbors and including the marginalized and the others, our way of being in the world, our way of opening our lives and our homes and our routines to people, our way of creating a safe and disarming space on Sundays for people to experience shameless belonging as their starting point for their journey with Jesus, our way of posturing our attitudes, our time, our generosity, our resources, all of it, they carry with them inherently deeper meaning than what it might seem on the surface. And I don't mean that in some performance way. I mean that at the level of challenging what's beneath the surface, that everything lines up in the way we live our lives. We are constantly earning trust or hurting trust. We are communicating that we care, or we're not communicating that we care. And trust takes time to build, right? But it can be destroyed in an instant. So when we are positioning our lives and our attitude and our relationships and this community, not this building, this family that we're becoming together, when we position it in fear, we don't express care and we don't earn trust. But when we position it in love, all of a sudden we live such beautiful, trustworthy lives among the pagans, among the outsiders, that though they accuse you of doing wrong and you'll find yourself misunderstood and outside the norm and behind the power dynamics of culture, they may eventually see your life and do what? Glorify God. And I mean this in the totally least not performative. I don't mean this in a performative way. And let me take the pressure off, because this isn't about pressure, it's about participation. Let me say something cosmically beautiful about how God is. God's already working in people's lives. He is already actively pursuing and loving people, all people. He's already sending himself and his spirit to reveal himself to people. He's already at work in your family and in your kids. He's already at work in your workplace and in your community and amongst the team of people you're around all the time. And our role isn't so much as to figure out how we can make our mark. It's about to say, God, what are you doing? Where are you doing it? How can we go with you there? And if we ask that question, where will it always take us? To the marginalized, to the hurting, to the lost, to the outsider, to the broken, and to the needy. The strength of our capacity to love a community well is in loving a community, not fearing a community. Fear isolates us from that participation, and love puts us right in the middle of this mess. And I began this series by saying, in a moment where fear and anxiety and worry are pervasive, if not crippling at times, my hope for you in your internal journey with this is that you do not let fear determine who you become. Instead, you let love do that. As the Apostle John said, there is no fear in love because perfect love casts out fear. And as a follower of Jesus, his desire is to form you into a person of love. Then you put followers of Jesus together, and what's his desire for us? That he forms us into a community of love. And so this is my invitation this morning as we close out this series. Will you set your life and our life together on becoming a community of love within a culture, even a religious culture of fear, for the sake of people who have yet to take Jesus' invitation of love? We want to be fearless in the way we love people. And so if we are going to do that, and if we are going to be a church known for its love, and if the clipboards of our lives are going to communicate the care and trustworthiness of who we are, I want to invite you into 4 shifts. And I wrote 37. I'm bringing you 4. And I'm praying that these are the 4 that God is speaking to us. Because, yes, we could talk about it at a theoretical, macro level, the greater church, but I think these might be 4 distinct invitations to us right now. Before I do that, if you feel, let me just throw this out there. If you feel stuck in your journey with Jesus, may I invite you into a secret code of how the kingdom works, in my humble opinion. Oftentimes, the ceiling of our apprenticeship with Jesus has something to do with the gap between taking the love that Jesus is giving us and then giving it away. You want to get unstuck in your experience of Jesus' love for you, express it to other people. You want to find healing for the darkest parts of your life and your heart and your baggage and your stuff, go participate in someone else's healing and redemption story. Where you are tempted to become a lake of your own stuff, become a raging river of God's love, flowing to people, receiving it and giving it away. So for some in the room, that may be your message. Go to Applebee's and pray about it right now. Okay? Leave. Don't get confused. There's other things. Leave. If that's for you, walk out the doors and we will cheer you on into your journey of loving people. All right? But for others, let me invite you into this. And here's the first shift. From a theology of arrival to a theology of journey. What does that mean? Let me explain. People are on a journey. If you're living, your story isn't done being written. That rhymed and wasn't written. People who don't follow Jesus are on a journey. People who do follow Jesus are on a journey. And let's be honest. Are there people in your lives whose journeys freak you out? Maybe it's your own. Are there stories that you're like, that's for someone else to do? That's for the paid pastors and not for the rest of it. Like, I remember the first time that I was in Skid Row in downtown Los Angeles. It's this downtown area that's just been completely given over to homeless transient community, and you can imagine what goes on there. It is full of crime, of drug use, of unhealed or even treated mental health issues, sex trafficking, and just filth and human waste. It's awful. It's awful. I remember being shocked by what I saw and what I experienced. But that wasn't my greatest challenge, and this is not a good example. This is just a real example of my own journey. Because my greatest challenge in understanding what we had just participated in came at a debrief from the team leader from the Dream Center. And the Dream Center is who we had partnered with for the week. They have the ongoing presence there. And he showed just extraordinary patience and compassion and love for these people. He talked about how God has as much of a plan for their lives as he did ours, how God loved them as much as he loved us, and even how God was using aspects of other faiths to bring them into a clear picture of who Jesus was. And I'll be really honest, I wasn't feeling it. It was hard for me to believe any of that. What I saw was so beyond my norm and so challenged my way of thinking about things at that time that my reaction was less to be like, let's get in the mix, and it was more to dehumanize these folks. What I had just experienced didn't feel good. It didn't feel like it mattered. What good was it giving bottled water and toiletry kits to people who are so mentally ill or doped up to even notice? For years, people have been doing that. What change had happened, right? I mean, after all, they had done this to themselves. They had made bad decisions. They were suffering the consequences. They had arrived at the inevitable end of their decisions or an unfixable misfortune. And so as the leader of these students, when we were asked by the leaders if we'd like to go back again later in that week, I thought at that point in my journey that the best thing I could do for my students was to protect my students from these people and not go back again. So that's what we did. Thankfully, I'm not like that anymore. Don't think so. And that's an extreme example. I looked at these people as if they had arrived, not as if they were on a continuum of a journey. Think about your life for a second. Would any of you be satisfied with this point of your journey being the arrival point? Are there people in your lives, maybe that are purposely not in your lives, that they are not in your life because you've placed on them the burden of arrival rather than the invitation to journey? Fear will cause us to paint people as arrived and done for. But love will invite us into journey. And the first question isn't with people, are they in or out? Because that's God's job to sort out, not ours. Our first question is, how can the posture of my heart, how can the desire of who I am want to journey and include and give belonging and space for these people? I even like that word, these people, for people who are struggling in their journey in the space of mine. Jesus lived and died for that journey. And people are on a journey, and so are you. And so if we are going to make a shift from like a viewpoint of people as having arrived to a theology of journey, I think there's a couple things we can do. Number one, we must think of salvation as an ongoing process of the healing of our soul, with far more mystery about when God justifies and when the rest of the journey unfolds. There are definitive moments. Sometimes we say they're more clear than what they actually are. I don't know how it all works, but we must rethink salvation from transactional moments to a lifelong of transformation. Most of the early church fathers and mothers wrote about salvation as the healing of the soul, the ongoing healing of the soul. So if we are going to have a viewpoint of people as on a journey, we must rethink salvation similarly. I did a message on that about a year ago, and I can give you books. There's not time today. Second thing we must do, we must take our journey seriously so that we have something to offer. And the third thing we must do is that we have to see God's redemptive plan for what it is, as continually unfolding. It's a story that you and I are caught up in. It is continually active, and He is at work in people. And it might look a little bit like this when you get to a certain moment. You're sitting with a person, you're developing a friendship, and they're asking questions and they're turning towards Jesus, and Jesus is not some distant place. He's actually right there with them, so don't misinterpret this chart. But they're asking questions, and they got stuff, and it's some serious stuff, and it's messy stuff, and it's costly stuff. The question is, as they are turning, do we go with them in a way that looks like this? Goes like this to the next slide. Or will we turn our back and say they've arrived? They're at the place where, of course they are. Look what they did. Their circumstances are impossible. I can't fix that. So what will we do? How will we view people? First, shift from a theology of arrival to a theology of journey. Second is this. We must shift from criticism to curiosity. From criticism to curiosity. If you've ever had Taco Bell at 2 a.m. with a self-proclaimed atheist who had just dressed up as a monkey at your Young Earth Creation lecture in the basement of Marshall's Student Center before they got bougie and built nice ones, then you missed out. How many of you had Taco Bell at 2 a.m.? How many of you found yourself regretting that decision by 2:30 a.m.? Here's the background on this for me. It was my freshman year of college. I've said this before, but here's the brief version. I thought I could save Marshall's campus by convincing them of young earth creationism. I was all out and zealous for it for a while. So I created a night, brought in a professor. He was going to talk and give scientific basis for young earth creationism, one that I do no longer hold as top tier of like in or out sort of stuff. That's a separate conversation. And as you would imagine, when the night came, it was a very sparsely attended night. And those who came did not come to learn or hear or listen from the other side. They came to outshout the other side. One in particular individual came dressed in a purple monkey suit and was just a very disruptive individual the entire night. But something magical happened later, because the guy that was dressed in the purple monkey suit, making fun of us, morons, like me, the morons, is in his view, came up to me and he actually apologized. He actually apologized at the end of the night and said, "I'm kind of curious though. Would you like to talk more about what you're talking?" We're like, "Well, yeah. What's open? Taco Bell. Heck yeah, let's go to Taco Bell." So there we were. And for the next 2 hours into the far recesses of the night, dining on cheap tacos and fueled by Baja Blast, something magical happened. Because the guy who 2 hours earlier was shouting us down, dressed in a purple monkey suit, started to express some curiosity. He asked tons of questions. Well, how could you think that? Where are your sources? What's your background like? How can you get there? Then you get past the scientific data and it starts to get to real, and you're like, well, this is kind of completely unknowing. So what's the worldview and the experiences that bind up to, like, say, I'm going to interpret it this way versus another day? And then all of a sudden the door opened after curiosity that he told me about growing up in a very, very, very conservative Christian religious home. And it was a home where asking questions was not welcome. And in a sense, in his community and in his own family, he had essentially been shunned because of his just desire to ask questions. And he told me about how he was currently identifying as an atheist, but he was finding something interesting about Viking mythology and spirituality. He was on a journey. And it was shared curiosity that opened the door to real conversation that finally got beneath the surface. Curiosity led to being disarmed in conversation. The disarming led to more conversation, and more conversation led to understanding. And I don't know what he thinks today. I don't know where he is. I don't know who he has become. I don't know how he looks at life. But I do know that there are thousands more people around us just like him. People who right now, hear me, in a loving way, who, because you're a Christian, even if you're not this kind of person, because you're a Christian in this cultural moment, people who expect your critique but long for your curiosity. Let me say that again. There are people who expect your criticism, your critique, but they long for your curiosity. Any Ted Lasso fans out there? One of the best scenes on TV ever is the scene of darts with Rupert. Yeah, come on. Can I get a witness, Jacob? Just go watch it. You know, there's foul language and things that fall outside, but there's a moral lesson inside this moment where, because he wasn't curious, he didn't know his story. And because he didn't know his story, he thought he could just manipulate him out of a moment and shame him and exercise very, very not nice power dynamics against him. And in the language of Ted Lasso, be curious, not judgmental. For us, curiosity will require our humility. It will require us to say, yeah, I used to think everyone would come to know Jesus if we could convince them for the scientific basis of Genesis 1 as a literal young earth account and give them all the stalactite and stalagmite resources that show carbon dating, that give that footprint, and chase the genealogy of Jesus to 6,000 some years. And they're not even asking that question. They're like, yeah, but I don't even know if I can trust any of Jesus or the Bible anyway. So we must move to a place of humility. I'll just throw this in there in case you're like, is he putting Ted Lasso as the defining person of why we should be curious? Go read the Gospels for a moment and center yourself on all the interaction that Jesus had with yet-to-be followers who asked him questions. What did his response look like? A sharp critique of their question because they're wrong, or a question about why they're asking their question. Sometimes we exchange a right posture towards people with a lack of humility for having right answers based on our own pride to not be wrong. I got to move on. We must shift from criticism to curiosity. How? Humility. Humility. Shift number 3. This sounds really familiar. I'm going to give you why this matters and put some legs on it. It is from doing church to being the church. From doing church to being the church. Christianity 101 for a second. The church isn't a building, it's a people, right? The church isn't an event, it's a family. It isn't a program of religious goods to consume. No, it is a movement that exists for the world. The church isn't meant to be something that we consume. Rather, it's meant to be a family where we each have the role to play with Jesus as a head. We all have unique expressions of what we get to do together. The church is contextual. It is local. It is communal. It is innovative. It is responsive. It's meant to be adaptive but never captive, faithful but never judgmental. It's meant to be a beautiful, non-angry contrast on offer to the way of the world, giving hope and joy and peace out of who we are together. Paul described the church as a new humanity. You got it? Which means that as more folks come to follow Jesus in our community, hopefully through the way we are living our lives, expressing care and earning trust and participating with God in his redemptive story, the others, you got to be prepared for this, all right? The others will become our brothers and our sisters. So let me remind you of something crazy. Jesus' inner circle, his 12, was full of others. Enemies of one another even. Matthew the tax collector, beautiful name. Beautiful name. Real nice, beautiful name. Oh my gosh, that's the first time I've ever done that in my life. And I did it in front of people. Matthew, just remember me from my emotional moment earlier. Matthew, tax collector, was in bed with his people's oppressors, stealing from his brothers and sisters, participating in the unjust occupation of his people. And then there's Simon, the zealot, who was like a legit assassin. He was part of a movement that would sneak up on in crowds, like Assassin's Creed style, with a dagger under his cloak, and he'd sneak up and slit the throat of a Roman person and then slip back into the crowd. That was how they were getting their power back. Matthew was stealing from his people or collecting from his people to fund the oppressor, and Simon is going crowd to crowd killing them. And Jesus says, you're the 12 I want. Follow me. I will make you fishers of men. And the guy that's later going to deny me, we will build the church out of you guys. How is that possible? Because Jesus is reconciling people into a new humanity, a new family. And can I just say, he's breaking down, let's use Paul's language in Ephesians 2, did 3 weeks on this about 6 months ago. He's breaking down the dividing wall of hostility. How? Through adoption into the family as his sons and daughters. And that, my friends, is messy. When a mom and dad decide to adopt, and they already have other kids in the house, adopted kids or bio kids, they're all their kids. They don't just become the parent's son or daughter. They become the sibling's brother or sister. Sometimes our view is that if we can just turn people into God's son or daughters, we don't have to be their brother or sister. That's doing church. That's leading with this leading edge that is kind of like good-intentioned, obligatory, go feed the hungry and save the lost, but never turn them and include them into this family that is breaking down the dividing walls of hostility and uniting us into a new family. For what purpose? With Jesus as the cornerstone, but for what purpose? So that God's Spirit may dwell among them. For what purpose? So that more sons and daughters can become brothers and sisters and return to their rightful status, to this holy, holy, holy God who was the Lamb that was slain that deserves that reward for his sacrifice. If we're going to be the church, you and I have to make peace with the mess. And oftentimes when things get messy, we go towards two extremes. On one hand, we draw clear boundaries to protect ourselves and maintain our integrity, but it's always at the expense of the mission of the church. We isolate, we protect, we wholly huddle, as some would say, and then we render ourselves no longer relevant or effective or in relationship to the world God is calling us to participate in. The other is to so far assimilate, to blend into culture in order to win it and win its favor and establish our relevance, that we lose our message and its power. It's the way of accommodation. But somewhere in the middle is living as brothers and sisters with Jesus as Lord and Savior, defining not that he's just the way to life, but the way of life, and embracing the mess that is that process. And embracing the mess is the greatest gift that we could give to one another, because it will cause us to depend on Jesus. How many of us are depending, actually desperately depending on Jesus in the mess of everyday life? Or is it something different? If we're going to be the church, God's redemptive community, his new family in the world, for the world, we have to embrace the mess. And secondly, we have to confront our comfort. Come on, man. Go back to the Trump thing. Confront our comfort. I've shared this with you before. I want to share it with you again. And this is where I might get passionate again. And then we'll get out of here. Why do I always feel like that? If this is like the thing that defines our whole life, can't we give it 10 extra minutes? Sorry, for real. There's a missiological principle that I've showed you before, and I want to show you again. It's called the redemptive edge. And so you can think of it like this. There's this first image where there's a continuum of Jesus' ministry. There's a continuum that represents Jesus' ministry to the world. And basically, the redemptive edge says this, that all of us, as individuals, but even churches will set themselves up as a reflection of that, tend to, by design or by default, position our lives somewhere along the missional continuum, and we get comfortable there. So on one side you see comfort, on the other side you see darkness. In between, caution, concern, and criticism. Now I want you to think about the ministry of Jesus for a second. Again, this isn't just good ideas. This is like Jesus' life. Jesus lived in a space called the redemptive edge. His ministry took place between criticism and darkness. And I want you to consider what Jesus was being criticized for doing, and by whom he was being criticized for doing it. He was being criticized for eating with sinners, for the way he interacted with women in a religious culture that subjugated them. He was being criticized for breaking the rules and the religious protocol of his day. He was being criticized for including a guy like Matthew the tax collector and Simon the zealot in his inner circle. He's being criticized for getting down in the dirt and humanizing this woman caught in adultery and calling out those that were trying to judge her and stone her. But he was also confronting darkness. He's including the Samaritans, the outsiders, the less thans. He's including and casting out the demonic. He's getting down into the urban cultural centers at the Decapolis, and he's going toe for toe, challenging the thinking of his day. Jesus lived in this space where he was consistently being criticized by both the culture of his day and the religious establishment of his day. Why? because he spent his life pushing back darkness by including and being around the others in order to bring salvation and healing to a world full of darkness. Jesus reached outsiders to the criticism of both the culture and its power dynamics and the religious establishment of his day. Therefore, we say that he lived in the space of the redemptive edge. But there's this other side of the continuum. And it's down in the space between comfort and caution. This is the space where if you and I just let life happen to us and we let the modern Christian church just offer us all the programs that you and I want, this is where we will set our lives up. Not because you're bad, but because there is a conspiracy against your soul. And there's a conspiracy against this church and every church. And it is to settle and push you towards missional mediocrity and irrelevance. There is a conspiracy that works to push you further and further away from the redemptive edge into your place of comfort and our place of cautiousness. But I want you to see, reread the Gospels and see that not that much, actually barely any of Jesus's ministry took place there. I'm going to name something specific for us for a moment. I don't know if you've noticed around here, whether you're new or been around a long time, but we have been painfully, and I mean painfully slow, to introduce to you or reintroduce to you what most people would just call normal church programs. Matt, when are you rolling small groups out again? Matt, what do you have for men's ministry? Women's ministry? What's your outreach plan? Why don't you have a food pantry? All great things. All great things. But can I tell you why? It's because oftentimes, and one of the reasons that some of you are physically sitting here today is because this is what your desire of your heart is to actually find. So oftentimes, church programs will take up residence right there. In the space between our comfort and our caution. Church programs, in the way we do church, oftentimes lend itself to creating comfortable, cautious, protected, programmatic Christians. That's not what we're going for. We don't have it figured out, and I'm not saying we're doing a good job of leading you in a different way, but I want you to know that we're not after building programs for us to participate in. We're in for creating culture of community, a culture of formation, a culture of mission, not programs of mission and programs of formation and programs of community. We're doing our best. Tim Keller, 20 years ago, talked to a church planner that was coming into New York City. He mentored him for a minute. Many of you know Tim Keller, prominent leader in New York City, and amazing person, passed away. And he was explaining to this new church planner, and he said, be very, very, very cautious about as you plant this church and other evangelical Christians come to you, and they start asking you for what programs, be very, very cautious about immediately putting them into small groups. Here's why. Because they will lose their edge to care about people. Because they will settle into a programmed place, 8 weeks at a time, 12 weeks at a place, into a place of comfort and caution. And I am not anti us figuring out how to create community around here. But what I am saying, as a warning, prophetic word maybe even, is that for most of you, most of us who have grown in church, you've done the programmed small group, you've done the programmed outreach, you've done the programmed church thing a million times, and the deeper desire of your heart is, can we create culture and identity and community? Can the Spirit come in and indwell these spaces in a real way that it's not something we do as the church together, but it's who we are as we live life as a way of life together. And to belong here and to fit in here is to say, because it's so real here, I'm going to get stuck into community because I can't step through these doors without being invited into friendship. I can't be in this place without being invited into, hey, we're going down and we're going to go invite some people and throw a dinner party. We're going to invite the stranger. I've got this neighbor that I've been working on for years. Could you just come over and help me clean the house and get ready? That's culture. Do you have a food pantry? No. Do you have a kitchen? Yes. That's culture. And there's 17 other food pantries in the valley. We can get you food. We know people. There are real gaps, and then there's innovated, created, programmatic gaps so we can feel good about us reaching people in the name of really just a programmatic thing that lives at the surface. And hear my heart, like lovingly, I'm not mad at people. I'm not mad at the history of this place. I'm not mad at other churches. This is not that. Everyone is doing the best we can. But can I tell you, there's something stirring in me and in us that is playing a slow game. So over the course of time, as we follow Jesus together, we will be a people defined by deep-seated, transforming from the inside out culture of love. Because if you and I can be so caught up in loving Jesus and loving people, we don't have to construct anything. We empower. We send. You feel it? All right. I'll never forget being on a trip out west in college. We're going to the Grand Canyon. We got to this place where there's these natural hot springs. And everybody, and that was back when, I had the body of a demigod. You know what I'm saying? Not full on, but like, it was a moment in time I wouldn't have been embarrassed to take my shirt off. You know what I'm saying? Like the dad bod wasn't. Anyways, so I get out there, and because I'm so cautious, I just dip my feet in. I think, Chris, you were there. Just dip my feet in. But everything inside me said, just get in the stinking natural spring. How many times are you going to live and be out in a natural spring in this most majestic place of beauty ever in your life? But I was too cautious. Too cautious. How many times do we settle? Because our comfort and our caution, just living cautious, holds us back instead of just full immersion. Not naked, but full immersion. Up in the hot springs of life and mission and life together. And here's the final shift in 30 seconds. None of this can be built on strategy and good leadership. It's part of it. But it happens in a word. From control to surrender. To surrender. Those things matter. And we're going to give our full best effort in those directions. But where's it coming from? Trying to control it? Or just to surrender? If participating in God's redemptive plan requires discerning where God is actively working and joining Him there, we got to surrender to where that goes, what it looks like, what it costs us, what happens in our comfort. Sometimes we make our safety our idol, and we fail to live from an internal mantra that says, may the Lamb that was slain receive the reward of His suffering. Jesus desires to form you and I into a community love. Will we become people whose beautiful, messy, complicated, but Jesus-centered lives become attractive, sticky, and leading us to the marginal? Or will we continue to copy a version of a previous copy, a version of a previous copy, and have nothing to hand off to the next generation who's asking their questions, to people who are longing for more, and they expect our criticism, but they want to be met with our curiosity. They feel like we fear them and don't want anything to do with them. Just imagine a valley full of you and I falling in love with all of that. Love enables us to become and to create a culture of community, of formation, and of mission. And so I'm going to invite you to stand. And I know I've taken extra time today, and I appreciate you sticking with it. And this is the invitation today. As we sing, said a lot. That could be an own series at some time. It probably will. We'll get all 37 shifts. But this is the invitation. My sense is that there would 100% be some sort of unique way for you to interact with a message like this. But what that requires for each and every one of us is one simple thing: to reopen your story to God's. Where you feel shut off, reopen. Where you feel closed off, reopen. Where fear is causing you to back out, reopen. Where being burned in a relationship or somewhere else is causing you to be callous and hard and go through the motions, just reopen. And let God's tender, kind, gracious, loving presence meet you there and invite you into something. So that as He heals your soul and you count the cost to follow Him, He leads you towards people who need the same thing. And if you feel stuck, reopen your story to expressing the love that's been extended to you. So Jesus, here we are. Messy, broken, beautiful, complicated, wandering sojourners, pilgrims, apprentices of you. With a wide spectrum of stuff, belief, anger, hostility, openness, closeness, just people. Would you form us into your family today? Would you light a fire in our hearts for what's on yours? And would you break our hearts for people, for the vulnerable, for the lost? And would you trust us? Would you trust us? Because we're trusting you. So Jesus, help us to reopen our stories to you today.